Hi, I'm Lindsay Bradsher, and I'll be analyzing Nosferatu, directed by F.W. Murnau, starring Max Schreck. The story of Nosferatu is based on Bram Stoker's Dracula. Hutter is a real estate agent who is sent to Transylvania, leaving behind his wife Ellen. He's in Transylvania so that Count Orlok can buy a house in his town. As he stays at Count Orlok's castle, he sees various disturbing things and is eventually bitten by Count Orlok. As he's trapped in his room, he sees Orlok filling up coffins with dirt and loading them onto a cart. And as Hutter is trying desperately to get back to his town of Wisburg, Orlok is also traveling by ship to get there before him. On board the ship, Orlok rises to kill the crew members, though they think it's the plague picking them off one by one. Meanwhile, Ellen is sleepwalking and having visions of Orlok as he gets closer. Orlok causes more deaths in Wisburg, leading people to believe that the plague has reached their town. In Hutter's book, Ellen discovers that the only way to defeat Orlok is to give him her blood willingly so that he's lured into the morning sunlight. Ellen comes up with a plan. She fakes an illness, telling Hutter to leave. When Orlok comes to her room, she waits until just before the morning, and as he bites her, the sun comes up and the rooster crows. When Orlok tries to escape, he vanishes in a puff of smoke. Ellen and Hutter are reunited again and have a happy ending. Different kinds of photographic shots are used to move the story along. For example, long and full shots are used to showcase the body language of the silent film actors, who use exaggerated movements to compensate for the lack of voice. Close up, we get dramatic shots of Count Orlok and shots of his frightened victims reacting. I did notice that the director lingered on the actors' faces in close-up sometimes, whereas today they might cut back and forth a little more, and I think it's so that you can really get the detail in this black and white, a little bit lower resolution movie than we would have these days. We also see many sort of grand establishing shots to show that this wasn't shot entirely in a studio. They have real locations and they want us to see them. The director also uses these faraway shots to give a sense of scale to the vampire and show how weird his movements are. In the scene where Orlok is carrying his coffin through town, you get a sense of speed and also of his great strength when you see him move his small figure moving across a large frame carrying that big coffin. Related to photography is mise-en-scene, or the framing or composition of each shot. This movie definitely uses closed form. It sets up the shots very carefully to show a certain mood or tell something about the story. It's not meant to look like a documentary. For example, in this shot, the camera seems to be set at eye level, but as Orlok rises, his eye level goes above yours, and he looks very dominant and fills the entire frame. He's exactly in the center of this frame, showing that almost as if he's rising right into your face for a very shocking effect. In other scenes, they use the opposite effect for the same reason. They show Orlok very small, but in seeing the grand scale of the scene, you see how strong or fast he is, how easily he's moving around in this big scenery. In the image on the right, you can see that the camera angle is not positioned at an eye-level view anymore. It's from very high up, which makes it seem sort of voyeuristic as Hutter is looking out of his window down on the courtyard below. You almost are afraid that Orlok's going to look around and see that you're sitting up there watching him because it's not a typical movie camera view. If we go back to the scene in the ship, it's very cluttered with boxes. The wall is fairly close to the viewer to give you this claustrophobic sense of being underboard of a ship. And when we go back to this other scene where Orlok is shown small, they're outdoor shots where you see the density is very low. There are buildings and things, but it's kind of open. And then when he's loading his boxes, there's some sense of clutter because he's getting things together, but it's still much more open than the ship scene. Nosferatu makes good use of movement, both in physical movement effects in the camera and the movement of the actors. Motion special effects that are used in this movie are fast motion and reverse motion. They use fast motion in the scene where Orlok is moving around the screen, loading up his carriage with all the heavy boxes, and he moves supernaturally fast. Then, when he's on the ship, they use reverse motion to make him rise from his coffin instead of falling down into it, and it looks like he's stiffly rising using magical powers. Max Schreck's way of moving and walking in this scene adds to the horror in this movie. His movements are slightly off and jerky, but he still carries the coffin smoothly as if he's freakishly strong. And in general, he's not dancing, but his choreography in this movie is an unsettling combination of these jerky, strange motions and gliding, purposeful movements that show his strength and power. A contrast to this is Ellen's sleepwalking scene, where she seems to be pulled upright by some unseen force, and her movements are sort of slow and dreamy, as if she's being dragged along. This movie makes great dramatic use of costumes, sets, and colored filters over the film. The costuming for Orlok uses very stiff fabric. It looks like it's a black and white movie, but his costume in particular looks like it's dark black, rows of long, straight buttons. His tie is tied very tightly as opposed to other characters where their clothing is more loose and flowing and open. He has no hair. He looks very alien and strange and also tightly buttoned up, so he looks almost armored and strong. But when you look at the other characters, their shirts are shown sort of open, they're very loose, they look a lot more vulnerable, especially Ellen, like when she's sleepwalking, she's wearing these loose flowing robes, there's the loose flowing curtains near here, everything seems very exposed. And something else the director has done that we don't really think of as much now that we have color movies instead of black and white, is that he's tinted the entire frame in different colors to show what time of day it is. Nosferatu uses a mix of real locations and fabricated sets to create a sense of the fictional world. I like what they did in particular with the ship above and below deck. The above deck scenes give a sense of distance and time as the ship is traveling towards the town, but then below deck it gives that horror feeling of the claustrophobic, you're trapped with a vampire feeling, and they connect them very well. So far, we've been cutting back and forth between above deck and below deck, but when Count Orlok rises from his coffin and the crew member sees him, we see the crew member running up the stairs, runs above deck, and then jumps off the side of the ship, and it really connects those two different scenes together, the fabricated set and the on-location set, and brings the whole thing together. With respect to acting, I thought Nosferatu was very interesting because the star is obviously Max Schreck, but he's not a leading man, and it's not like other versions of Dracula where the vampire is a sympathetic or charismatic figure, so I thought that was really cool. Max Schreck was picked for this part because of his skill with costumes and makeup, and I think that his physicality and timing made this performance so good, even though he was more used to theater roles instead of roles on the big screen. And I think that silent film acting is kind of similar to stage acting, which may have given Max an advantage. It relies on body language. In the theater, it would because you're trying to reach the people in the back row, and in silent film because you can't speak. Also, in this movie, title cards explain the action and the dialogue, so the director has more control than in a theater production or even in a talking picture. Since the actors are pantomiming, a lot is left up to the musical accompaniment and the title cards. Overall, Nosferatu is a groundbreaking movie with lots of elements to really dig into. What did you think?